Ladies and gentlemen, coming to you from the Colonial Dungeon, this is the Court Martial Podcast! Introducing your host for this evening, he has a bald spot on the top of his head, and he weighs in tonight at a number you don't need to know. He is the Colonial Loudmouth, Sean Macaulay!
And welcome. And I mean it too. Welcome to another edition of the Court Martial Podcast. I am, as always, your Colonial Champion, Sean McCarty. Today, oh God, we have a lot to talk about, but and we're going to see how this all plays out, because I have a feeling that we might have to skip a segment this week in order to make it happen next week. But let's just see how this rolls. And now this particular podcast, this one right here, right now, as we speak, being released, I wanted to start by saying this has been a week after WrestleMania, and for those of you, as I mentioned on last week's video, if you haven't already listened to my review on the Totally Awesome podcast, the TAW review of the pay-per-view of WrestleManias, both night 1 and 2, I'm going to put that link in the description. I mentioned it before. I'm going to mention it again. My good friend, Mr. JoshAgeddon himself, the proprietor of Totally Awesome Wrestling to You, and he and I put that together. Of course, sooner or later, probably in this week or the next week, we're going to have him back on the show, as he is he's incredibly fun to talk to, and he and I believe personally have a great chemistry together. Whenever we do talk about wrestling, you know, it's always a nice back and forth. We take each other's chops with grace and dignity as only we can. And I'm not just trying to put him over now just because, but so stay tuned for that, because I want to incorporate him a little bit more, and sooner or later, maybe within the next month, maybe a little bit after that, I want to get some other people on this show, a couple other friends of mine who believe, and maybe even some wrestlers themselves if they get up to it. So we'll have to see how it all goes down and how it boils out. And the reason I'm telling you this about the updated programming is I am still in the process of trying to get the drive-by finished. As far as the first set of ones and getting a new logo and getting the things, because I still want to be giving you the drive-by. I have not forgotten about it. That's going to be released on Monday or Tuesday of each week. They're little 20-minute segments from me when I drive to and from work. The audio quality will not be as good. I'm going to tell you that right now, straight up. I'm going to do as best I can. But my best may still suck. So, not so bad that you're like, oh my God, I can't listen to this. But bad enough to where you'll notice a difference in quality between this audio and that audio. So, but I've got a great new series that I'm planning out. I've got most of the videos already recorded, and I will let that speak for itself. But look closer maybe to the middle or the end of the month by the time I get to doing that. I have been trying to get you the quality program you deserve. It has been difficult because I've been doing a bunch of other different videos, which, while I'm doing plugs and programming plugs, if you're into other gaming, I have a separate gaming channel called NWE Colonist. NWE, all caps, Colonist, just like your Colonial Champion, the whole 9 yards. I'm going to put that link in the description. I've been doing a 30-day marathon of 2 different games along with my commentary. So if you want me to start talking smack about some Super Nintendo and GameCube adventures, feel free to check that out. But this is a wrestling podcast, so we're going to talk about wrestling. And even though I promised last week that I was not going to talk about WrestleMania 36, I inevitably am going to talk about WrestleMania 36, but I'm not going to talk about everything. I just want to talk about certain business aspects that have become very obvious over the course of the last, well, it's been longer than a week or so, but it's been really prevalent over the last week or so, and I just want to talk about those types of things. So first, I mentioned and teased before that I was going to talk about the big difference between modern wrestling fans and actual wrestling fans. And what I mean by that is that right now, we're at an insane time where WWE has been the number one, the top wrestling promotion for 19 years, near almost 20 years. WWE has roasted and retained their rule over the roost. And it has gotten to the point now where we have people who are 18, 19, 20, even some of these college kids and whatnot, hell, even people my age and older, who have been, it's a generation of both talent and fans who only know WWE's format, because that's all that they have ever been exposed to, because that WWE, as they would be the first to tell you, are the be-all, end-all of sports entertainment. And so, as a result of this, the point I'm trying to make with this is that a lot of these fans, unless they really do a deep dive and they really start to look at the roots and the history of professional wrestling, aren't going to see the different ways that wrestling can be promoted and presented and pushed as something that feels more legitimate than what Vince McMahon has been doing for the past 30 years. And I'm not knocking that, because I very much enjoyed a lot of what WWE has done over the past 30 years and more. You know, I've just been watching, I mentioned it a couple weeks ago, I've been watching All-Star Wrestling from the mid-70s. And some of their stuff, even then, is a bit hokey, but it feels way more legitimate than now. But, you know, that was also when Vince Sr. was running things, and it felt more like a wrestling promotion rather than a sports entertainment spectacle. And as of now, we have got far more sports entertainment fans than we do wrestling fans. As far as people who are very loud about the business and who speak, I don't want to say on behalf, but a lot of it on behalf of the business too as well. Like, there's a generation of the boys now that have only known WWE's format, of people who have a generation of talent that basically think that all the wrestling should be is what WWE is, and in order to be different from WWE, they have to do crazier and zanier and more outlandish shit, as opposed to, you know, with the exception of places like the NWA and Billy Corgan, and obviously there are exceptions to this, as there always are, but even that has gotten a little, you know. I watched an episode recently, and I was not as impressed, and not just because Cornette wasn't on it, but and I like Barrett too. I think that he's Stu Bennett, I think is his name there, and Joe Galley, and I like the whole crew. I do. I really do. Except for David Lagana. And it's just, even some of that has even gotten a little out there as far as a lot of like the wrestling content is concerned. It's gotten a lot more, let's do a bunch of moves as opposed to let's tell a story in the ring. And you know, I like, who's the guy they just got? Matt Cross. I love Matt Cross. I think he's great. And I think he tells a good story. But sometimes even he, to me, gets a little out there as far as doing a lot of stuff. But I loved him in Lucha Underground as Son of Havoc and all that. But he's great. But now, the point I'm trying to make with this is that we don't have, as far as when people think of pro wrestling now, they don't think of wrestling. They don't think of the, you know, like, I don't think of pro wrestling like Arn Anderson, Ric Flair, all the territories, and I'm still diving into it, and even the early WWE stuff, all the way up until maybe even Hogan, and even Hogan. I mean, most people will associate Hulk Hogan. I mean, that's what a lot of people think of, because that's when it turned national and got such a huge acclaim. But the casual wrestling fan, I'm not sure even exists anymore. We always try to talk about how, we need to be bringing in a casual audience who are just flipping on the TV. But I don't know if there's such a thing anymore, because sports entertainment has been the only thing on for so long that now there's a generation of wrestling fans who only like wrestling for what WWE has made it. And now, obviously, there are exceptions to this. And what led me to this realization is that I've been watching. I also watch the Cultaholic guys. I know that there's a lot of online smarkdoms that you can choose, which is why I'm happy you chose the Colony. I watch a little bit of Cultaholic, and got, for a WrestleMania that I by and large thought was crap, save for their movie spectacles, which were both incredibly well put together, but not matches, and we're going to talk about one of those later. And and without a crowd, it just was mostly bad. I mean, it's not it's not even the fault of the talent either. That's the crazy. It's not the fault of the talent. It's just their format. I can't stand WWE's format and the way they do things, and it's insulting. It's insulting a lot of the time. And and sports entertainment fans are looking at pro wrestling like a drama, like an art. Like it's drama class. It's drama class with wrestling, and that's kind of what Vince has kind of instilled. It's the way that they've manufactured, for lack of a better term, the industry for, I would say, at least from 95 on, back, and it's probably even earlier than that. You could make some arguments for. It's just WWE's format. It's just what they've liked. That's what Vince McMahon Jr. has liked to do. And it's what's gone by. And you could say what you want about Russo, and we'll talk about him. We're going to talk about him another day. Russo's a whole different can of worms to unravel here. And we probably end up doing a full 40-minute talk just on Vince Russo alone. It's the format. It's not even the talent, it's the format and the way that they've presented these wrestlers. And sports entertainment fans think that the acting plus wrestling is the way that pro wrestling is and should be. And I believe that the wrestling fan would very much prefer, even though they know it's a work, to the idea that they could suspend their disbelief that these people are mad at each other, want to fight each other, and could actually be doing damage to each other. The sports entertainment fan is like, oh, jolly good, it's all out of fun, I like it. And the wrestling fan's like, I want to see these two guys fucking kill each other. I want to do cause for them to be mad. I want to do cause for them to look like they really want to fight and hurt each other. And then I want a heel to do something dirty that makes me not want him to win. And I mean real dirty, not just, oh, well, here's a trope they've done a jillion times and everyone, it's like there's a way to present wrestling in a wrestling format that may, even if it's not legitimate, feels legitimate. And I believe that there are wrestling fans still out there who would very much appreciate that. And it would probably be a wider demographic of people than the people that Vince McMahon caters to, which a lot of the times is children. I hate to say it, he's all about putting smiles on people's faces. He's really, when you say, Vince McMahon wants to be the Walt Disney of wrestling, I hate to call corny back into the equation, but that is the perfect way to put it. And we need to have more people than Walt Disney making movies. You know what I mean? It's like if Walt Disney was, and who knows what's going to happen between the next 10 years and how much Disney's going to buy, but if we had one company, if Walt Disney owned every TV station and movie studio in the country, which is where it's headed, God, people would go insane. They'd lose their minds. They would lose their minds because a lot of people don't like, and it's very similar because, like, the Marvel movies use a lot of CGI, and a lot of people think that there's not a whole lot of substance to that because they're using the CGI, so you can go, ooh, ah. Or they do the kids' movies. And the theme parks, which are all catered to kids, or the child at heart in you, whatever. That's basically what McMahon's trying to do, but with pro wrestling, but with sports entertainment, because he's not in the wrestling business. I would like a wrestling company in the wrestling business. And AEW, I hate to say it, is not. AEW is a discount sports entertainment business. With the exception of exceptional programming coming out of Cody and MJF, and it's hard to say even Jericho and Matt Hardy, and I love those guys, but I still maintain that Matt Hardy should have come back with a different gimmick. As opposed to coming back with the broken mat. I think that's been long played out. I'm not digging this stuff with him and Jericho and the Vanguard thing. I really am not. I would have rather seen Matt reinvent himself for a new company. That's all. I don't think it makes sense for him to return broken when he's smart enough and has enough creativity in his body to where he could have manifested that in a different fashion. And AEW, it's like they want to do what McMahon does, but their way, which is cut rate, because they've never really known how to do the stuff that Vince McMahon does. Instead of going for a completely different look and a completely different feeling and tone, and making it, even though everybody's like, oh, well, we know it's a work, being able to suspend your disbelief. That's why the CGI stuff, it's like, okay, this is a sci-fi movie. If you were looking for a psychological thriller, you wouldn't go to Marvel. You'd go to DC. It's like, maybe we don't want to see the Marvel movies of the entertainment and wrestling, sports entertainment and wrestling world. I'd like to see some darker DC thing. You know, it's what appealed to me about Lucha Underground. Yes, it was obviously a TV show that used wrestling to tell its story, but those stories were so well told that you could at least believe that these two wanted to kill each other and wanted to fight each other, and it wasn't even just about having the best type of match and for the quality of the fans and whatever. And especially not for a star rating by some super fan. And you know, and all you have to do is go back to the relaunch of the podcast to know what I'm talking about. So in summary of this, I want a wrestling program. And right now, we have no wrestling programs, and I'm afraid that we have bred wrestling out of people, and out of fans, and out of the boys, worst of all. And I hope and pray that I'm wrong, or I hope that a thing like NWA gets a serious TV deal with some serious people that aren't Dave Lagana, and they can actually put on a wrestling show, and it'd be very interesting to see what kind of audience it would gain. Because if they're on YouTube and getting 100,000, and it was like 300,000 hits when Cornette was around, just saying. But I just want, so I want to be wrong. And anyone can be a convert. And I can attest to this because I am a convert. I used to be a WWE and WWE alone guy. And it took a lot of history watching and some old school things and a lot of Cornette podcasts to make me realize that you know, perhaps there's something to be said about having both a sports entertainment company and a wrestling company out at the same time. We might actually enjoy it more than we do what we've got. So, next up, I want to talk about, and speaking of media transitions, that kind of brings me into my next point about this, and this is, we're going to do 2 matches of the week this week. I know, that is absolutely insane that we would do 2 matches of the week. And the reason we're doing 2 matches of the week is that I am going to save our Superstar Spotlight and do a twofer next week with or without, and I'm not sure yet what his schedule is, but judging by the state of affairs in the entire country, I'm assuming he's going to be free. We are going to do a little Superstar Spotlight and a match of the week all about the APA. Because JBL, as we mentioned, was going into the Hall of Fame, and we saw him on WWE's WrestleMania. And it got me thinking, it's time that we talk about JBL. It's time we talk about Ron Simmons, their individual careers, as well as their careers together. Their collective careers. And we're going to have a match of the week that involves the APA. I haven't decided what yet, but it's also going to be our first dive into the Attitude Era proper. Since we've started the podcast, that is going to be our first Attitude Era match of the week. So don't miss it next Friday, April 17th, 2020, only here on the Core Martial Podcast channel. And thank you very much. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, all that deal. And as subtle as my self-promotion is, what was not subtle about this entire deal and about the entirety of WrestleMania was the Firefly Funhouse match. Now, if you haven't already listened to the review of WrestleMania 36, you can go take a look and listen to it. I put it in the description already. But I'm going to give you a synopsis of what I said. And I wanted to go into a little more detail than I did there. Because I've had I've had a few more days to think about what happened in this match and what it was about and what it meant. And the more that I think about it, the less I like it. And now let me say now. Let me start with the positives. The thing is, I am, of course, a Smark at heart. And this match was a Smark's wet dream. If you followed the Dirty Dirt sheets, if you followed, if you were a Meltzer guy or if you were a Wrestling Inc. guy or a PW Torch or whatever these dirt sheets you get, and you get all your information and the speculation and the comments and the internet wrestling community at large. If you are aware of those things, which is, pretty much right around the audience that WWE has now, is pretty much just the IWC plus some children, and they still cater to mostly the children. But the IWC, which is a decent portion of their audience, this was fan service for them and them alone. And for that, their video production quality was through the roof on both this and the Boneyard match. Both had incredible video, AV quality. But this one particularly was very well done. They used a lot of good B-roll. They had a lot of good scenes to recreate, and it was all about Cena turning gradually heel and what he should have done then and he never did, and the repercussions his past, what might have been, and it was this giant montage, making the whole "this is such good shit" reference. They made sure that they put in every IWC trope into one giant 20-minute ice cream sandwich, and boy, and did the Smarks eat it up, myself included. I thought it was tremendously entertaining. But what I realized, the more that I've been thinking about this thing, is that this really only would have made sense if you had listened to all the Dirty Dirt sheets, if you had looked at Meltzer's garbage, if you had talked to people in the IWC about these things, or you'd seen the leaks, or at least followed the article headlines, and you had been following all of these tropes, and you'd listened to Jericho's podcast about McMahon saying this is such good shit, with Moxley, and you'd have to have known what John Cena's progression was. You would have had to known that everybody has talked about what if Cena had joined the NWO, Cena in the NWO, that's what they wanted, right? Ha 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 ha. They made so many Smarky references, and it was glorious as a Smark. Because they basically put a mirror onto all the things we were saying and then said, here, cocksuckers, here. Cena loses, he turned heel, and Wyatt wins. Shut the hell up. And that's what that was. It was a 20-minute movie of nothing but Smark fan service. But boy, are they good at tricking us, though? For all the times that we complain the Smarks do about wanting proper wrestling and real storylines and real things, they tricked us into eating up 20 minutes of something that had nothing to do with wrestling, that had nothing to do with a match. There was no fighting involved, save for a couple spots out of nowhere for no reason. Well, not for no reason, but to further tell the story. But they did take 3 bumps, and the Smarks ate it up like they had just seen Steamboat and Savage at WrestleMania 3. It's like they trolled the hell out of the Smarks by giving them a fan service movie. And it's genius. It is straight up genius on their part. I will give them full marks for that. They did. It was genius to play around with the Smarks and give them something that they could go back and do their little dirty reviews on their dirt sheets and their YouTube channels and their podcasts. It was great. However, that's the Smark in me. That's the entertainment van in me with that match. The guy who realizes that wasn't wrestling, they're just showing me a movie. Okay, let's do the movie and let's be entertained. Rather than buy into wrestling, let's just remember that this is just entertainment. But then I started thinking about this match. And I mentioned this on the podcast. This match, I have to not call it a match. I'm sorry, it was not a match. this spectacle, this event, because it was not a match, it was a movie. And it was a very confusing movie. Let's take the wrestling fan out of it for a minute. Anybody who wasn't a smark, what sense would it make for Cena to be in the NWO? None of this would have made sense to anybody unless you knew all the references. It's exactly what AEW's problem has been. You can't tell people stories if they don't have all the all the prerequisite material. And this, I understand they were caught in a rock and a hard place with this whole thing going on, and I'm not trying to I'm not trying to say that WWE didn't make the best of the situation in the hand they were dealt, even though they should have just postponed the show. But if this is a wrestling program where most of the show is wrestling, and even the one thing that was a movie prior to this was still a fight and looked like a fight, they did the thing with Wyatt and Cena together, like as the 80s wrestlers, and Cena was doing the Hogan thing with the hand weights, and Wyatt was doing the thing. It was like they went back and they just ripped apart every single piece of professional wrestling they could from their entire history, pretty much, and made it into this pony show, a pony show movie where they basically just made fun of their own business and made a mockery of their own professional wrestling business that they used to be involved in. They made an entire mock on it, spit on every wrestler who had worked there, spit on anyone who had ever taken it seriously. God forbid Bret Hart watched this thing. Anyone who ever felt like this was something that could be taken seriously and had a reason to be taken seriously, at least to the sense that you could at least buy into the fact that people didn't like each other and wanted to fight, this took all of that and basically jacked off in its face for the sake of a couple internet fans like myself who are going to eat it up and talk about it on their sheets so they could go click on their keyboards and type a bunch of text jacking WWE off. But it's interesting, because if you look at WWE's Instagram page on this match, everybody was like, this was a waste of time, this was dumb, this was stupid. And then there's the one smart going, yeah, I fucking loved it, it was the best thing I've ever seen. And then more, oh, this was awful, this was a waste of time, what even was this, why was Cena in the NWO, I'm confused. None of this made any sense. And for all of us smarks who have been dying to have WWE make sense, and yes, this story did in a vacuum, but in a context and the confines of a wrestling program, it made no sense. If you didn't know the references, if you didn't know what was going on, if you didn't have any clue who Bray Wyatt and John Cena were, this in no way would help you understand who they are, why you should care about them, or what kind of reason they had to not like each other. It told a story, yes, but it didn't tell anything that had to do with wrestling. It just told a story that about two wrestlers who one of whom could take you back in time and transform you, and then claw your face and finish you off. But this really, to the wrestling fan, every single wrestling fan should be ashamed of this match and of this quote-unquote match, because it's not a match. It was a movie, and it was a movie that spit in the face of its own history. And how could you look yourself in the mirror and be comfortable? If you're Vince McMahon or Bruce Pritchard is the one who helped, put this together, how could you look yourself in the mirror as a professional wrestling fan and advocate, especially someone like Pritchard who's been around this for so long? How do you look yourself in the mirror at night and know that you just spat in the face of you spat in the face of your own career? And obviously they must view it differently, otherwise they wouldn't have done something like this. But to me, a wrestling fan who likes wrestling and wants a wrestling program, it was appalling, it was disgusting, and I'm really sad that they put wrestling on after this. What service did this do Brock and Drew, even with the fact that there was no fans, which was bad enough for McIntyre? Then you got to follow basically the company that's going to put you as their top champion just said, hey, remember, it's all bullshit anyway, and look how dumb we were back then. oh, we're so much better now, showing you how dumb we were back then. Here's the entire curtain and showing you everything. And they've been doing this for years, obviously, and there's a fan base that appreciates that, which is why this whole thing happened. But God forbid you took this seriously. It's like WWE just laughed at you, the fan, for taking this seriously. Ever. And they just laughed and spit in your face. I feel like my face has been spit on. After they peed in my food with 3/4 of these day one finishes. It's like, obviously, I'm just here to complain, right? Because I'm still going to be watching the big 4 pay-per-views. I'm still going to be watching the SummerSlams and the Survivor Series and the WrestleManias and the Royal Rumbles to come. I'm not going to stop doing that, but that's pretty much all I watch at this point. Unless somebody brings me something in, or I do a match of the week, or I'm doing deep dives. But as far as modern programming is concerned, I'm not going to stop doing that unless they take it off the network, and then, well, we'll go to that bridge when we get there. But it's, to me, this match represented everything that is wrong with modern professional wrestling style and format. Because it wasn't a match, it was a movie, and that movie made it so that there was no reason to ever have a match in the first place. And that's just infuriating as someone who wants to suspend their disbelief for somebody. And it's just, it's not Cena's fault. It's not Wyatt's fault. I don't think. But I think their line of reasoning must be that the damage to wrestling's reputation has already gone so far down the toilet that making a movie making fun of pro wrestling and ever taking it seriously is totally fine now because wrestling's reputation is totally in the toilet. And it's like wrestling's reputation is in the toilet, and then they dumped a big fat turd right on top of it and then flushed the bowl. It's that to a wrestling fan. And like I said, as an entertainment fan and as a smark, it was wonderful. It was wonderful. And as an entertainment, I'd probably go back and watch it and enjoy for its entertainment. But as a wrestling fan and as somebody who is really starting to appreciate wrestling more than he is pro wrestling, or more than he is sports entertainment, this was rough, man. This was just rough. I was laughing, I was enjoying it, but part of me was dying inside seeing it because it was, and poor Drew and Brock for even trying to make that look serious after that. How do you make something look legitimate after that? You can't, and they didn't because they couldn't. God. Oh, I'm getting gas. So let's change over to the next topic I'm going to talk about before we hit the last match of the week and close out for the week. Or have to take our commercial break, that is. I'm amazed that they allow us to keep going this long before we get to commercial breaks. Because these movies, right? Like the Boneyard match and the Boneyard Spectacle, the Boneyard event, and the Firefly Funhouse. Those two spectacles and those two events, those movies that were entertaining, very entertaining. I like both as a smark. Kind of leads me to think that maybe we might be seeing a transition here from WWE. Because the video production team, I've long said that the video production team in WWE is unmatched. They have true professionals working for WWE and their video production team. Wouldn't it be interesting if eventually, with the way that things are going, as far as, things go further south economically and everybody staying in their homes, what if WWE took one of their brands and made it into an hour-and-a-half long movie? Instead, cut the show to 2 hours, but do cinematic style fights like this in cinematic guns. They're going to call them matches, but they can't be called matches. It's these guys versus these guys. They use wrestling as their format, and WWE becomes a higher budget Lucha Underground. that uses more movie cutscenes rather than their backstage segments and stuff like that. Because how do you look legitimate after this? That's the thing. How do you possibly try to attempt to put on a regular, legitimate pro wrestling match after something like this? I don't believe you can or you should. So they might as well just go off the deep end with it and have WWE, the main roster, be the cinematic style, the movie style fights. And they could do all their supernatural, goofy, outlandish shit, and nobody would get bat an eye because that's the whole framework, is that it's in the confines of a movie. And then NXT becomes the place for standard wrestling format, and instead of making the move over to the WWE and calling that be a call-up, they could just have some sort of back and forth, and you could, or you could just have NXT be the main brand of pro wrestling, and then have the actual sports, the entertainment side of it be WWE's main roster. I wouldn't mind that if they split it up and were just being honest with the fans about it and said, we're not trying to even make it even resemble wrestling. We've just got people who can wrestle on the program. And here's the flip side of that too, the thing that could also benefit this whole situation. Let's say for all intents and purposes that this does happen, right? I would imagine that there will have to be some wrestling fans and wrestling boys, a lot of the talent, who look at that and go, we don't want to act. We don't want to be actors who wrestle. We want to be wrestlers who occasionally use what they mean to tell stories, who occasionally act, but most of the time are just being genuine or sound genuine at the very least, even though it's a work. That inevitably may in turn re-spark pro wrestling. And if it takes WWE going full movie mode to revive the pro wrestling business, then by God, that might be the solution. I mean, of course, I'd much rather just a regular pro wrestling promotion come up and then WWE can do whatever the hell it wants and people just start taking that seriously. But I cannot wish for pure miracles. So what we get might be what we get, but it'll be very interesting to see how WWE goes from here, especially with how well it seems like these two movies were received. And, who's to say, especially when they go after this, but there's going to be a lot of structural shift in WWE going down the line, and I wouldn't be surprised if the transition to movie-style wrestling isn't in their cards, or at least hasn't been discussed behind closed doors. Now, let's move away from the entertainment and the sports entertainment and the anger associated with that. And let's move on to our second match of the week. We're going back to 1992. This is a match. Now, originally, I was going to watch Ron Simmons beat Big Van Vader for the WCW Championship on August 1992. However, when I typed it into the WWE Network, the first match that came up instead was Ron Simmons versus Vader on December 30th of 1992, with Big Van Vader trying to get his title back, being accompanied by Harley Race. And so because I had not seen the return match and the rematch for this belt, I decided to give it a look. Admittedly, I wasn't a huge fan. And it's not either Simmons or Vader's fault. I mean, it was good. I mean, it was good for a title match, but it was just, there were certain things that were off, and I'll tell you what I mean. First of all, I want to talk about the referee, Randy Anderson. I've always liked Randy Anderson because he always seemed to be a genuine guy, tried to call it down the middle as best he could, got caught in a lot of rock and hard places, especially with the Nitros from 95 and 96, especially into the NWO era with Nick Patrick turning, and, he always tried to be the one who was just straight down the middle. Just tried to do it as best he can. This match took 4 minutes for them to finally get a lockup. You start, the scene opens with the camera, with them standing back and forth, standing against each other. And then Vader looks around, and then Simmons looks around and holds his hand up. And the reactions at first are getting pops, but by the time we're 2 minutes in, and 3 minutes in, and 4 minutes in, everyone's like, all right, can we just get this going? It was way over milked to try. I mean, Vader was barking at fans, like literally barking like a dog at fans, like Rick Steiner level barking at fans. It was it was 4 minutes of being way over milked. Then Vader gets Simmons into the corner and threw some very stiff-looking swipes on either side of Simmons' head. And the more I watched Vader, the more I realized he really does lay it in pretty hard. I mean, it even seems like he might throw a potato without even knowing he hit you with a potato. I mean, that's kind of the way that he did it. Then Vader gets, but Simmons really takes the advantage. He gets a lot of power moves. He does a Superman punch long before Roman Reigns ever conceptualized the idea, and although it looked a little bit more like a Superman forearm, but it still looked great. Ron Simmons is so damn athletic. Was getting a good cheer from the fans, but it wasn't what I thought he was getting at the time. So it almost makes sense that they gave the belt back to Vader. But then again, this is also 1992 WCW, where they, at this point, Hurd had just caused Flair to leave at the beginning of that year, and Flair wasn't coming back for at least another year, or at least another few months, and that was mostly because Hurd was out of the equation at that point, because Bischoff was starting to come back in 93 and brought Flair back, and this was the tail end of the Hurd era, but Simmons was still great. Then Simmons hit a top rope clothesline to Vader and knocked him over the top rope, and I was a little surprised because that was a weird instance, and maybe I'm wrong in this assertion, but I thought that the over-the-top rope rule was around in WCW up until 94, 95, because I remember there used to be talk about that, but I guess that was probably stuck in the 80s, and maybe that was one of the things that Hurd did when he was looking at McMahon and trying to, well, not trying to compete or emulate, but he was, you know, maybe he said that, oh, that was stupid and let's make it happen. I'm not sure whose decision that was, but in 1992, on December 30th, there was an over-the-top rope clothesline, and that was okay. So that is the earliest up to now, of another wrestling company that wasn't WF or WF, that wasn't the WWF or the WWWF that had done that. Then the match goes on. There's a heat spot where it's a very subtle heat spot where Harley Race, who's on the mic the whole time, just telling no pain, no pain, no pain. He's just yelling into the mic, which is just hilarious. Harley's heel managed work was funny. But then there was a moment where he said something and Simmons turned his head to look at Harley Race, and then that exact moment Vader came in and hit him, which a very subtle heat spot, but also very well done, and it was noticeable, at least on my part. Then, of course, Vader gets, starts putting the boots, and he hits a really stiff elbow drop, or at least it looks stiff because Vader's massive. And at some point, as Ron Simmons was in control before that heat spot, at some point Vader lost the mask, and I'm not sure where it was, but it was, it almost made Vader feel a little more human in a weird way, which actually really helped the selling of the whole moment, because this is like Ron Simmons is getting the better of Vader again. Vader looks more human now than he ever has. And then Vader comes back, and of course with Harley by his side, and then Vader keeps going, and Simmons can sell. He's selling pretty well, but they don't do any close-up shots of him. And then finally, after like a headlock or a chinlock from Vader, Vader shoots Simmons onto the ropes, Simmons reverses Vader shooting him into the ropes, and instead hits him with a spine buster, which Tony Schiavone very expertly says, "Oh, and it's a sidewalk slam." Except it wasn't, Tony. I know. I love you, Tony, but everybody makes mistakes, and you're pretty notorious for making mistakes as far as calling the moves. Not as bad as McMahon or Cole, but still. But that spinebuster didn't really even get the pop I thought it would, which makes me think that maybe Ron Simmons had lost steam as a talent, or as a world champion at least, and they had to get the belt back to Vader because Vader was getting a bigger reaction. Which is true, because the boos to Vader were stronger than the cheers to Simmons. That's definitely a truth. Then there was a reversal into a back suplex that which Simmons hit, which was great. Simmons went to get him up to finish him, and instead Vader reversed it and got a shoulder breaker, 1, 2, 3. And we have a new Jesus, God. We have another WCW World Heavyweight Champion in Vader. And there really was no heat spot to get the finish. There was no cheating. I mean, Vader didn't really need somebody to cheat, much less Harley Race. But, they did the thing. But it kind of was, I wouldn't say it was a flat finish, but it didn't get the heat I was expecting. But maybe that was just from the booze. I'm kind of thinking that maybe it was different, like actually seeing it live as opposed to being on TV. Because just on TV, it just wasn't, it didn't have the same oomph as I thought it might. But Vader wins the WCW Championship, and then somebody threw a soda. And that's kind of why I said, okay, maybe this actually was more heated in the actual arena than it was on TV. Because on TV, it just was like a fart in church. Like a big old farty rip in church where everybody kind of looks up to the guy. And actually, even better than that, it's like a guy who answers his cell phone in church. And everyone's like, oh, God, how dare he? But it was, I don't know. It was just, it didn't come off as impactful as I thought it would upon watching it here, as I'm sure it was live. But you could say that about any sport, can't you? And I do say sport because in my opinion and in my view and in my perfect little fantasy world, wrestling is still a sport. And with that said, we have to take our first commercial break. When we come back, we are going to have an exclusive APA examination of both Ron Simmons and JBL, as well as a JBL and Ron Simmons APA match review. And we'll also have some other stuff to talk about. We may have JoshAgeddon on the show. We may not. You're going to have to tune in to find out. But with that said, my name is Colin, as always, and we will be right back after this.